What would you do if a stranger arrived at your door on the darkest night of winter? Would you welcome him inside, or would you feel fear in your heart? That question still lives inside me because of one night in the mountains when my life changed forever. The wind was wild that evening, pressing hard against the wooden walls of our small house. I remember how the shutters rattled and the roof groaned. My mother was cooking soup over the fire, and my younger sister sat beside her, turning the pages of a worn book. I was the eldest, 19 years old, and I often felt responsible for everyone. My little brother, only 9, was carving a stick with a small knife, while my uncle sat quietly near the fire, shaping a piece of wood into a bowl. If you enjoy stories like this one, please remember to subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below. It helps me continue bringing you more emotional English stories made for your learning. That night, we were alone on the mountain. Few people lived near us, and fewer still dared to climb the path when snowstorms came. The nearest village was far below in the valley, and sometimes weeks passed before we saw another face. Yet we did not feel lonely. My mother always said the mountain kept us company. I believed her, but on storm nights I was not so sure. The sound of the wind carried strange notes, like voices calling from outside. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps on the path, only to find nothing there. My uncle told us these were tricks of the storm, but my brother often hid his face against my shoulder. I tried to be strong for him, though inside I sometimes wanted to do the same. The fire glowed bright in the center of the room. It was the one place of warmth and safety we had. I remember watching the shadows move across the walls, long and thin like creatures dancing in the dark. My mother ladled soup into bowls, and the smell of herbs filled the air. It was almost time to eat when the knock came. At first I thought it was only the wind again, beating harder than before. But then it came a second time, slower and heavier, like a fist striking the wooden door. We all froze. My little brother's knife dropped to the floor. My mother looked at me, and I could see the question in her eyes. I walked to the door with my heart thudding in my chest. When I pulled it open, a blast of snow rushed inside. A man stood there, his cloak covered in white, his face pale from the cold. He looked young, perhaps in his 20s, but there was a strength in his eyes that seemed older. Without a word, I stepped aside, and he entered. My uncle quickly added wood to the fire, and my mother handed the man a chair. The heat touched his face, and he sighed with relief. His hands trembled as he held them near the flames. I brought him a blanket from the corner, and when I placed it over his shoulders, he gave me a small smile, almost shy, as if he was not used to kindness. He told us his name was Tomas. He had been walking since morning, trying to cross the ridge before the storm closed the path. He had hoped to reach the village in the valley, but when the snow grew too heavy, he searched for a light. That was when he saw the glow from our window. My mother gave him soup, and slowly his color returned. For a while he spoke little, only thanking us for saving him. But later, as the fire warmed him, his voice grew steadier. He told us he was a traveler who wanted more than food and shelter. He said he had been moving from place to place, never satisfied, searching for something he could not yet name. His eyes shone when he said he wished for a life that people would remember, not one lost to time like snowflakes melting in the river. I watched him closely as he spoke. There was a kind of hunger in him, not for bread or meat, but for meaning. It made me uneasy, though at the same time I was drawn to him. My sister, too, seemed curious, leaning forward to hear his every word. My uncle listened in silence, but I saw his hands tighten around the wood he carved. The storm outside grew louder, shaking the shutters and whistling through the cracks. Yet inside the house, the stranger's voice held us like a spell. He said he dreamed of writing a book one day, a book that would carry his name beyond death. He spoke of men who were remembered for their courage, women remembered for their beauty, and leaders remembered for their power. "But me," he said, "I have none of those. Still, I want my life to leave a mark." His words touched something inside me. I thought of our life on the mountain, simple and quiet. Few people even knew we existed. Was that enough? Would anyone remember me after I was gone? I felt a weight in my chest, as if the stranger had pulled open a secret I had never spoken aloud. The firelight flickered on his face as he leaned closer. "We all dream of leaving something behind," he said. "A stone on a grave, a story told to children, or a name written in history. But no one wants to vanish without a trace." My mother placed her hand on mine then, as if she sensed my thoughts. She smiled softly, the way she always did when she wanted me to remember what mattered most. "Happiness is here," her eyes seemed to say, "not in the dreams of strangers." Yet still, I could not forget his words. The storm outside showed no mercy that night. The roof creaked and the walls shook as if the whole mountain wanted to swallow our small house. I remember thinking how fragile we were against such power. The fire gave us light and warmth, but it felt like a small shield compared to the roar of the wind and the endless snow pressing against the windows. Still, the presence of the stranger made the night feel different, as if something important was about to be written in my memory forever. My little brother finally fell asleep on the floor near the fire, his small body curled like a cat. My sister leaned her head against my shoulder, her book forgotten, and closed her eyes. Only my uncle and my mother stayed awake with me, watching Tomas. He seemed restless even as he ate the soup. His eyes moved from face to face, then often back to the fire, as if the flames reminded him of something he could not explain. After a long silence, Tomas began to speak again. His voice was low, but it carried clearly over the sound of the storm. He said he had wandered across valleys and towns, meeting people of all kinds, but nowhere had he found a place that felt like home. He spoke of his wish to do something great, something that would live on after his body was gone. He wanted to be remembered, not for wealth or power, but for leaving a story or an idea that others would carry forward. I listened with both interest and unease. There was honesty in his words, but also a sharpness, as if the desire to be remembered might burn him as much as it drove him. I wondered why he told us, strangers, these secrets of his heart. Perhaps it was the storm that pressed him to speak, or the warmth of our fire that opened his silence. My mother listened with calm eyes, her face gentle, though I thought she disagreed with him. My uncle's jaw tightened, and he said nothing, but his hands worked the wood harder until I thought it might crack under his grip. I tried to imagine Tomas's life. I thought of him walking for hours through deep snow, with no family waiting at the end of the road. I thought of his dreams of writing, though he carried no books or papers with him. I thought of his restless spirit, always searching for more than a simple meal and a warm bed. Part of me admired his courage, but another part of me felt sorrow. My life on the mountain was hard and lonely at times, but it had roots. His life seemed to have none. When the hour grew late, my mother laid blankets near the fire for him. She said it was too dangerous to leave until the storm passed. He agreed, though I sensed he did not like the idea of staying still. He seemed like a man who feared silence more than cold. Still, he lay down near the fire, and soon his breathing slowed. I did not sleep that night. I sat beside my sister and listened to the storm outside. The wind cried against the walls like a voice in pain, and the snow piled higher and higher. My uncle stayed awake too, keeping watch like a guard. Once or twice I looked over at Tomas. His face looked peaceful in sleep, softer than before, and I wondered who he really was beneath his words. Morning came at last. The storm had passed, leaving the world silent and white. The windows were covered in frost, and the door was half blocked with snow. My brother woke first, his laughter filling the room when he saw the shining brightness outside. My mother opened the door slowly, and we stepped into the frozen air. The sky was clear, and the mountains stood above us, covered in white like a giant resting under a sheet. Tomas joined us, his cloak pulled tight against the cold. He looked around as if he wanted to take the sight into his memory forever. Then he said quietly that storms always reminded him of how short life is, and how easily it could be lost. I felt a shiver that was not from the cold. That day he stayed with us, helping my uncle clear the snow from the roof and the path. He worked hard, though I could see he was not used to such labor. He cut his hand on the wood once, and my mother wrapped it in cloth. He thanked her with a look that stayed with me for hours. As the sun set, clouds began to gather again on the ridge. My uncle watched them carefully and said another storm might come, perhaps worse than the last. He led us to a place he had prepared many years ago. Behind the house, built into the mountain, was a small hollow he had strengthened with stones and wood. He said it could protect us if the snow came down too heavily or if the mountains sent rocks falling. I had never seen it before, and the sight filled me with both fear and comfort. That evening, as we sat by the fire again, Tomas grew thoughtful. He told us he once dreamed of living by the sea, where ships came and went, carrying stories from across the world. But he had been born far from the ocean, in a small village he had left behind. He spoke of his family only once, saying he had brothers but no home with them anymore. I wanted to ask more, but something in his eyes told me not to. The night grew heavy again, and the wind began to rise. My uncle ordered us to prepare in case of danger. We dressed warmly and packed food into baskets. Tomas helped without question, his face pale but determined. The air outside carried a strange weight, as if the mountain was holding its breath. It was near midnight when the sound came. At first it was a low rumble, like thunder far away. Then it grew louder and closer until the ground itself trembled beneath us. My uncle shouted for us to run to the shelter. My brother cried out. My sister clutched my hand, and we fled into the night. The snow was deep, and the cold cut into my lungs as I ran. Behind us, the mountain roared as if it was alive. Stones and snow tore free from its side, rushing downward with terrible speed. We reached the hollow, and my uncle pushed us inside. I pulled my brother close, holding him against me, as the sound of the slide filled the air like 100 storms at once. Inside the shelter we waited in darkness, the ground shaking, the air full of dust. I could not hear my mother's voice, nor my uncle's, nor even Tomas's. Only the endless roar of the mountain filled my ears. I thought we would all be buried there, nameless and forgotten, our little house crushed like a toy beneath the weight of the earth. But slowly the noise began to fade. The ground grew still. We waited longer, afraid to move, until my uncle struck a match and lit a small lantern. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady. He told us the worst had passed. When we stepped outside at last, the world had changed. The path where our house stood was covered in broken trees and heavy snow. Rocks lay scattered across the slope like fallen giants. Yet to our amazement, our house was still standing. The slide had split in two, rushing past on either side, leaving the small home untouched in the center. It looked almost as if the mountain itself had chosen to spare it. We stood in silence, each of us struggling to believe what we saw. My mother wept quietly, holding my brother in her arms. My sister clung to me, her eyes wide. My uncle crossed himself and whispered a prayer. But when I turned to Tomas, he was gone. I called his name softly, then louder, but there was no answer. The snow held no clear tracks, only the scars of the slide. My uncle searched with the lantern, but found nothing. My mother said perhaps he had been taken by the mountain, and we should not call again. I felt a coldness inside me deeper than the snow around my boots. We returned to the house in silence. The fire still burned, the chairs still stood in a half circle around it, as if nothing had happened. But the place where Tomas had slept was empty, the blanket folded neatly as if he had left of his own choice. I lay awake the rest of the night, staring into the fire, listening for a knock that never came. In the days that followed, the snow melted slowly, and the mountain grew calm again. Travelers passed by and told us of destruction in the valley below, of houses crushed and people lost. Yet no one spoke of a man named Tomas. No one had seen him before or after that night. Sometimes I wonder if he was real at all, or if the storm brought him to us only as a shadow. But I still remember his eyes, the hunger in his words, and the blanket folded by the fire. And I wonder if that was enough to keep his wish alive, the wish to be remembered, even if only by me. In the days after the Great Slide, life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but something inside me had changed. I could no longer sit by the fire without seeing the empty place where Tomas had rested. Every time the wind rattled the windows, I thought of the knock on the door that first brought him into our home. And every time I looked at the mountain, standing tall above us with its white crown of snow, I remembered the roar of that terrible night when it almost buried us all. At first, my family tried not to speak of him. My uncle said it was best to leave the past behind and to be thankful that we had survived. My mother agreed, saying that the mountain had spared us and we should not question its reasons. My brother, too young to understand fully, only asked once where the visitor had gone. My sister, though, stayed quiet like me. I knew she thought of him as much as I did, but she kept her silence, perhaps out of fear that our uncle would scold her for dwelling on what could not be changed. But I could not forget. I found myself walking outside more often, even in the cold. I searched the snow for any sign of him, though I knew it was useless. I climbed the path toward the ridge, my breath heavy in the thin air, and looked down at the valley. Nothing but white silence met my eyes. Once I thought I saw a dark shape far below, but when I moved closer, it was only a fallen tree. One evening, as the sky turned pink and the shadows of the peaks stretched across the valley, I felt something strange. It was as if Tomas was still with us, though unseen. I stood very still, listening. The wind whispered softly, not wild like before, but calm. For a moment I thought I heard his voice, the same restless tone, speaking about leaving a mark, about not wanting to vanish. My heart raced, and I whispered his name, but the air gave no answer. Winter slowly loosened its grip, and spring came to the mountain. Snow melted into rushing streams that carried stones and branches down to the valley. Green shoots pushed through the earth, and the first flowers appeared near our door. With the change of season came new travelers, people crossing the ridge to trade or to visit distant family. We welcomed them, offering food and warmth as we always had. I searched their faces, wondering if one of them might know of Tomas, but none spoke his name. One traveler, a woman with kind eyes, told us of a ruined village far in the valley where the slide had struck hardest. Many had been lost, she said, and some bodies were never found. I listened in silence, my chest heavy with unspoken thoughts. Perhaps Tomas had been among them. Perhaps his body lay buried under stones and soil, nameless, like so many others. The idea filled me with sorrow, but also with a strange kind of truth. He had wanted to be remembered, yet he might have been erased in a single night. I carried that thought with me as the months passed. I wondered if memory itself was enough. If one person remembered him, did that mean his wish had been answered? Could my memory of him keep his dream alive? I did not know, but I felt it was important not to let him fade completely. And so I told myself his story again and again, as if speaking it in my mind would make it real. Summer arrived, bright and full of light. Our house stood strong, the garden bloomed, and the mountains seemed almost gentle under the warm sun. Yet my thoughts often wandered back to that winter night. I tried to understand why he had come to us, why he had spoken his secrets, and why he had vanished so suddenly. My uncle believed it was chance. My mother thought it was fate. My sister said nothing. For me, it was a mystery that had no answer, and perhaps that was the point. I began to write about him. At first, it was only small notes scratched onto pieces of old paper. I wrote of his eyes, sharp yet searching, and of the way the firelight caught his face. I wrote of his words about leaving a mark and of the folded blanket by the fire. Slowly, the pages grew into a story, though I did not know if anyone would ever read it. Writing felt like a way to hold him near, and also a way to keep a promise, though he had never asked me to. Sometimes at night, when the moon was bright and the stars were clear, I walked outside and looked toward the ridge. I imagined him still climbing somewhere beyond, carrying his restless heart with him. Perhaps he had not died at all. Perhaps he had left us by choice, walking into the night to follow his dream. The thought comforted me, though I could not truly believe it. Still, in those moments, I felt less alone. Years began to pass. My sister grew taller and more beautiful, my brother stronger and more bold. My uncle aged quickly, his hands stiff from years of carving and hard work. My mother's hair turned silver, though her smile never left her. As for me, I remained on the mountain, watching each season change. Some people might say our life was small, hidden away from the world, but to me it was as wide as the sky above us. Yet no matter how many years passed, I never stopped thinking of Tomas. One autumn, a group of travelers stayed with us for several nights. Among them was a young man who carried a leather bag filled with papers. He told us he was a writer, collecting stories from people in the mountains. When he asked if we had any tales worth sharing, I felt a spark inside me. My uncle shook his head, saying we were simple folk with nothing of interest. But I could not stay silent. I told the writer about the night of the Great Slide. I told him about the roar of the mountain, the shelter my uncle had built, and how our house had been spared while the valley was destroyed. And I told him about the stranger who came to us, who spoke of his wish to be remembered, and who vanished when the slide ended. The writer listened with great attention, writing quickly on his papers. When I finished, he thanked me, saying it was a story worth telling. After he left, I felt both light and heavy. Light, because Tomas's memory had now passed to another person. Heavy, because I feared the writer might change it, twist it, or even forget it in time. But then I realized that did not matter. What mattered was that the story had been spoken and that someone else had carried it away. In that way, Tomas had not vanished. His wish had been answered, even if only in a small way. As the years continued, more travelers came and went. Some spoke of wars, others of cities full of lights and noise, places I could not imagine. Yet none ever spoke of Tomas. He remained only in my memory and in the few pages I had written. Still, that was enough. For memory, I learned, does not need to be wide to be deep. One heart can hold another forever. Now I am older, and my hair too has begun to turn silver. My brother has gone to the valley to build a life of his own, and my sister has married and left the mountain. My uncle passed away one winter, and my mother soon after. The house is quieter now, but the fire still burns, and I still sit beside it writing these words. I tell this story not only for myself, but for anyone who listens. Because once, long ago, on the night of the Great Slide, a visitor came to our home. He carried no gold, no fine clothes, no gift but his restless heart. He wanted to be remembered, and though his body may be lost to the mountain, I have kept his memory alive. Every time I speak of him, every time I write his name, he is here again beside the fire. And perhaps that is the answer to his wish. Not fame, not monuments, not glory carved in stone, but a story told by another. A story that passes from one voice to the next, from one heart to another. In that way, Tomas is not gone. He is the last visitor, and he lives still, not in the world of stone and earth, but in the world of memory and story. If you enjoyed this story and felt the emotions inside it, please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Share it with your friends so they can practice English too, and leave a comment below to tell me what you thought about Tomas, the last visitor. Your support helps me keep creating more emotional English stories for you.